Well, obviously it's gotten a lot of people's attention. When I first was a prosecutor prosecuting cases in the mid-90s, the fines were much lower. The amounts of money were significant, but I think that the rise of enforcement and the fines obviously have created a big interest around the world. I think what it's done is put the issue on the front burner for many companies, but I think for most companies it already was on the front burner. I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, what's the appropriate amount of fine and punishment for a company when you have conduct which is usually done by a relatively few employees? So I think there's a balance here, and I think that the amount of fines we're getting now might be on the pretty high side. One of the strange things about the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, fairly unique, is that most of the cases are settled. So unlike many areas of law, we don't have too many court decisions or court of appeals decisions that people can point to. So these settled cases, which are agreements between individual companies or persons and the government, tend to be viewed as setting the standard. I think in that way, it's a possibility that the reach of the statute is taken a little too far compared to what the legislative intent was. I think the government could help a great deal in this by promulgating some regulations to make the standards clearer, because I think now we're into an area where companies feel a level of uncertainty about what's subject to prosecution and what's not, and I think that's a little dangerous. Well, that's a very hard and delicate issue. For a company to push back against the government when the government has the ultimate power, that's hard. I think companies can push back. I think with the right counsel and the right approach to things, the government understands the law to some degree, and I think that there can be a discussion with senior people. I think there is some level of prosecutorial discretion, and I think that companies can push back. But it's hard when, in fact, litigating these cases is a very difficult, if not impossible, choice for companies to make. So the pushing back has to be done delicately, but I think it has to be done. And I think the government will listen to reasonable arguments, and they have in the cases that we've worked on. Ultimately, I think that has been very effective. Yeah, this is something that people ask me a great deal. I think that the trends that we're going to see, I think the fines will stay high. I think that we're going to see a lot of multinational enforcement actions. When I say that, I mean it used to be when I was a prosecutor that you'd have the U.S. government and nobody else was involved. Then you got the U.S. government, and that included the DOJ and the SEC and other agencies. Now I think you're going to have that same level of enforcement, but with several countries at the same time. I'm in cases now where the countries are involved on the front end of the investigation, and then of course on the back end, when the case is settled and the statement of facts is published, many countries will reach out to the government and say, I'd like evidence on various things, and I meet with foreign governments all the time. I think that's a significant trend. The other trend I think we're going to see is that more and more companies are going to want to find a way to comply with this law in a cost-effective fashion. We're in a resource-constrained environment now. I think people want to comply with the law, but I think they have to understand, and I think they want to understand how to do so efficiently and still not get into trouble. And I think the last thing that we're going to see is that the law itself is going to continue to evolve. I think we've seen in some laws around in other countries where a strong compliance program is effectively a safe harbor. I think that's largely the practice in this country, but I think that could be codified in the future. I think that's helpful. I think we're going to have to watch these whistleblower laws to make sure they don't subvert compliance programs. I think that's really important. There's a lot going on. I think it's going to be an exciting time and a fun area of law to practice in, but very challenging.